since I spoke, so I hope you don't mind the sound of my voice again. But we've got the topic of thriving at the moment, and today's topic is I will thrive when I live by faith, not by sight. I'm really excited to talk about this today because mostly I'm just going to tell stories. I hope that's all right. And I've got my usual fabulous visual aid to help me tell some stories this morning. I'm going to prop this up. So if you can see, this is on my jigsaw mat. So it's got these white lines on the map, which you can ignore. This is supposed to be a maze. It's a very tricky maze. I'm sure you can all do it within 5 seconds. But this is our visual aid this morning, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. I will thrive when I walk by faith, not by sight. The next slide. Walking by faith, living by faith, walking by faith, is all about relationship. I'm going to start with the end. This is the end. This is the punchline. This is all you need to know. See you later. Coffee? Ready for the tea and coffee? This is it. End of story. Living by faith, not by sight, is all about relationship. Now you know the end. Let's pretend that this is the end over here, and this is the start, and that's where we're getting to. And that's the end. So let's find out how we get there. Sometimes life can be a little bit like, the next slide, a maze. This is an underground maze, catacombs, filled with tunnels, filled with choices, filled with which way do we go? What decisions shall we make? Which jobs shall I apply for? Which course shall I apply for at university? Which person shall I say yes to? Which friendship shall I say yes to? Which invitation do I accept? Which one do I turn down? Lots of different choices and lots of different options. And I believe my whole theology of predestination is that God is a God of free will, and He made us in His image, and He gives us choices. And I learned that through parenting. You give your children lots of options, but all the options are things that you're happy with. And I feel like God does the same thing. He gives us options and He gives us choices, but all of them He's happy with. If it's not an option, that very clearly becomes obvious. But there are times in life where there are different options and there are different ways. And which way do you go? How do you make your decisions? How do you make decisions? Do you think things through rationally? If you look on the Myers-Briggs scale, are you a rational decision maker, or are you more of a feeling decision maker? You go with things that feel right, or do you think it through? Or do you ask for advice? And who do you ask for advice? Do you trust Google or ChatGPT or Claude or any of the other AIs who are coming? No? I've lost you there. None of you are on AI yet? Okay. Or we've got a clip here. So please indulge me a moment. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings, and I'm very aware that 20 years ago almost every sermon had a clip from Lord of the Rings. But it's been a while, so I hope we don't. This particular clip that I'd like you to play has got one line in it that I think is, just play it, as very, very poignant. They're in an underground tunnel full of maze, see? See the whole thing?
There's something down there.
It's Gollum.
Gollum.
He's been following us for 3 days.
He escaped the dungeons of Barad-dûr.
Escaped. Or was set loose. And now the ring has drawn him here. He won't never be rid of his need for it. He hates and loves the ring, as he hates and loves himself. Smeagol's life is a sad story. Yes, Smeagol, he was once called, before the ring found him. Before it drove him mad.
It's a pity Bilbo didn't kill him when he had the chance.
Pity? It was pity that stayed Bilbo's hand. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them, Frodo? Do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment. Even the very wise cannot see all ends. My heart tells me that Gollum has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before this is over. The pity of Bilbo.
The pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many. I love that clip because he talks about how, he says, even the wise cannot see all ends. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Go back to the next slide. So when we're trying to make choices, there's a phrase, isn't there, that the ends justify the means. And I think sometimes that particular phrase is used to justify some of the most evil and heinous things that happen in this world. And I often think of that clip because he talks about how we don't see all ends. We can't see, when we're stuck in the maze and all we can see are these different choices, we don't know where each of them is going to end always. And sometimes we think we know. We think we know the consequences of our actions, but we never really know all the consequences of every choice we're going to make. All we really have is what we can see right in front of us in that moment. Which is why living by faith and not by sight is so important, and is why we can thrive that way. Because we don't know the end of every choice we're going to make, but God does. And he gives us the steps along the way. God gives us commands, and sometimes we don't understand the commands. But we trust those commands because we trust that God can see all ends. And we trust that God can see all the consequences of our choices. Because we can't. We might think we can. We might think we know one of the ends or one of the consequences, but we don't know all the consequences of all our choices. We can't possibly know that. I often think of it like chess. We've got some grand chess masters here, haven't we? I don't get chess. It's far too strategic for me. I'm the kind of person who just likes to jump in and see where it goes. You can't do that in chess. You have to think 10,000 steps ahead. And as far above me as chess is, God is even 100 times further above that in terms of knowing all ends and seeing all strategies. But if we can trust him with the very next step, that is what it means to live by faith and not by sight. We trust God with the next step because we know we can't see all ends, but we trust that he can. So we're going to just look at the Bible, since we're in church. Why not? We're going to look at a story about the Joshua and Caleb from Numbers 13 to 25. So at the end of 40, they're on the edge of the promised land right now. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. Keep going quite quickly through this, please. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran, and they repeated to them and to the whole assembly, and they showed them the fruit of the land. So they've been into the promised land, and they've seen what's there, and they've come back and they're reporting. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites, Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan." Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who'd gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that explored. They said, "The land devours those who live in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak who came from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." That night, all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. And the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephthah, who were amongst those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of the meeting of all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me in spite of all the signs I've performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation stronger and greater than they." Moses said to the Lord, "Then the Egyptians will hear about it. By the power you brought these people up from among them. By your power you brought them up. And they will tell of the inhabitants of this land about it. They have already heard that you, Lord, are with these people, and that you, Lord, have been seen face to face, that your cloud stays over them, and that you go before them in a pillar of cloud and by day and a pillar of fire by night. If you put all these people to death, leaving none alive, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, 'The Lord was not able to bring these people into the land he promised them on oath, so he slaughtered them in the wilderness.' Now may the Lord's strength be displayed, just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. He does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. In accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now." And the Lord replied, "I have forgiven them as you asked. Nevertheless, as surely as I live and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills this whole earth, not one of those people who saw my glory in the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because of my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went into, and his descendants will inherit it. Since the Amalekites and Canaanites are living in the valleys, turn back tomorrow and set out towards the desert along the route to the Red Sea." Joshua and Caleb and 10 others all saw the same thing. They all saw a beautiful country. Next slide, please. They all saw the promised land. That's not actually it. It's just a beautiful place. And they all saw the big giants. But they both came back with a different report. 10 of them chose to focus on the problem. And when we focus on the problem, it becomes so big that we can't see, like the next slide, we can't see the goodness, the good in the promised land anymore, because the mountain of problems becomes so big when we focus on them. And my best friend used to have this phrase when I was at uni. She used to say, "Don't tell God how big your mountain is. Tell your mountain how big God is." Because they chose to focus on God. Next slide. And compared to God, the mountain was small. They chose to see with eyes of faith, where the others chose to focus on the problems that they could see. And which one of them thrived? It was Caleb and Joshua thrived. Caleb and Joshua got to see the promised land. Walking by faith. So there's a next slide. These are the two scriptures that God gave. God gave his word. They weren't just trusting in some random bit of land that they found and thought, "I want it, I will believe for it, and I will get it." They were trusting in the word of God. They were trusting in the promises of God. And that's really, really key. I think sometimes as Christians we just think, if I just believe it, it will happen. Well, what are you believing? Are you believing your own whimsy, or are you believing and trusting in what God has said and what God has promised? That's the difference between faith in God and faith in faith, which is just silly. So, next slide. What is faith? Faith is the confident assurance that what we hope for is going to happen. It is the evidence of things we cannot yet see. Caleb and Joshua saw the promised land, and by faith they believed they were going to live there one day. even though there were giants in the way, even though there were mountains in the way, by faith. And now they made a life and death choice. They were choosing to risk their lives. They were choosing to risk the lives of thousands of others. They were choosing the future of their entire nation. That was a massive choice to make. So here's the good news. You can skip to the next one because I covered that already. Here's the thing. They trusted God for these massive life and death, life-altering, history-altering decisions because they had seen God do things in small ways their whole lives. They had lived off tiny pieces of manna that rained down in the desert that kept them going. They had seen water come from a rock. They had fought battles with skirmished smaller battles, and God had helped them to win. They'd seen the oceans part to walk through. That was not a little thing, that was a big thing. But they had seen God move in lots of ways. Living by faith is not trusting an arbitrary being. It is about walking so close with Jesus that you trust him. It's about being so close with him that you trust him. And a relationship takes time to develop. You don't just trust somebody with your whole life the minute you meet them, do you? You get to know each other. And God builds this relationship with us from small. So my experience with the Christian faith is that living by faith, next slide, always starts small. And that's the good news. If you don't have to worry that God's going to ask you to do something that's just too big for you, because it will be based on a whole series of small things. So this is where I get my maze, and I've got my rocks. I'm going to just tell some stories, if that's okay. And every single one of these stories represents, every single one of these rocks represents another story. There are three things I'm just going to tell some stories about. I've put them into three categories because I think these encompass probably the most important aspects of our lives. And that is, next slide, finances, work, and relationships. These three things pretty much make up some of the most important aspects of our lives, wouldn't you say? If you're worried about anything, you're usually worried about money or about your job or about a relationship. There's probably others, but they're kind of big deals. So I'm going to tell some stories today. And we're going to start with money because, as the Bible says, it is the least of things. And when you trust God in the least, you can trust him in the big. I learned to trust God with finances. These are going to fall down, aren't they? My rocks aren't going to stick. I learned to trust God with finances when I was 4 years old and the collection plate got passed around in church and I put my 10p in the offering. That's where it started. It started with 10p on a Sunday, which is why I always give Eve a coin to put in, because that's where my memory of trusting God with money starts, with 10p in the offering. And then when I got my first job, I think my wage was £1.27, I think I got an hour, with my first job at QuickSave, scanning in the items. And I would come to church with my, I think I earned about £15 a week, so I'd come with my £1.50, and I'd put that, next slide, into the offering. So I would tithe my £1. I remember talking to someone else going, oh yeah, I just tithe in one big go at the end of the year. I'm like, yeah, how's that work out for you? I don't think so. Little and often, that's the way, little and often. So I started with that. Then the next, I'll skip a few steps. Skip a few pages, shall I? God was faithful. So when I got married, before I got married, God had always provided me with jobs. I worked in QuickSave, I worked with Argos. Every summer I would temp. You got paid loads for temping. It was brilliant. And it would be for the exact amount of time. I always had work whenever I needed it, and it was always really well paid. And mostly it went to pay off my student overdraft. So I always started every year in September on nil because God always provided the summer work that I needed. But then when I got married, I couldn't get a job for love nor money. We had it was only a 6-week period between getting married and going to New Zealand with YWAM. And in those 6 weeks, I'd planned to earn enough money to help pay for our trip to New Zealand. We were joining YWAM on a discipleship training school. It was going to cost, I think it was somewhere about £3,500 each, plus flights. It'd be double that now, because this is 20 years ago. So we needed somewhere in the region of about £8,000. And I was like, well, I can work and get a bunch of that. And at this point, my husband had always, for the last few years, didn't get a salary. And we've always lived this way. We live in a way that is called living by faith, or relationship-based support. We don't get paid in the traditional way. We have always relied, for 20 years, on people giving us money, generous donations from friends and family, and that's how we've lived for 20 years. So when it came to doing this DTS, it was like God was saying to me, you've trusted me for jobs, now you're going to trust me direct for money. So I still tried to get a job. I managed to get one temping job, and they promised me a week, and then they fired me after one day. Not fired, the person I was covering for wasn't as sick as she thought, and came back. And I'd already paid for my week's worth of travel, so I think I managed to earn about 20 quid that week. I might have been 40. And every single gift that came in that 6-week period was more than I'd been able to earn. And it was like God was showing me, you're trusting me for a new way now. I was offered this one job. It was to be a typist for a phone line that men call, you know. I was a newlywed, and I was like, no, thanks, that's going to traumatize me. So I could get that job. Didn't think that was appropriate. If you don't know what I mean, ask me later. So we were given enough money to pay for our discipleship training school in advance. We thought we were going to, because some people give us money every month, and we thought we were going to rely on 6 months' worth of that income to pay, but God gave us enough money to pay for it all in advance, which was amazing. So when we got to New Zealand, Johnny thought it'd be a really good idea to give that money away that came in, and we bought a boat for the charity we work for. We had no money. We lived below the poverty line, and we managed to buy a boat with what God gave us. I just think that blows me away. He loves that. That's one of his stones of remembrance along the way, isn't it, Johnny? That we bought YWAM a boat when we didn't have 2 pennies to rub together. And then what we did have was we had a little savings account, because we just got married. Lots of people give you money when they get married. That's just a little tip there. Lots of people give you money when you get married. And it was sitting in a bank account. It wasn't a lot. It was probably only a few £100s. But it was the only savings we had. And we were in New Zealand, and we were praying in this beautiful place called Gideon's Valley. It was gorgeous river and lush grass and beautiful trees, absolutely stunning place. And there were 2 people on our school who couldn't afford to pay the fees. They'd come paid partially, but they couldn't afford the full fees. So we were praying and worshipping and singing, and someone said, does anybody feel led to give towards these 2 people who can't afford the full fees? So they took up a collection for them from everyone else who was there. And I felt God say to give the money that was in our new married bank account. And Johnny came up to me and he says, I think God's telling us to give us this much, but I don't know where we'll get it from. And I was like, well, that's how much is in this bank account. I can't remember the exact, I'm terrible for numbers, but it wasn't much. It wouldn't have been more than £300. But to me, that represented our future. That represented our home. It represented our married life. As soon as this DTS stuff was over, Living by Faith was over, we were going to go and get a house, and this will be the money that will help us, set it up. It represented what I could see and what I could touch. And God was asking us to give it to him and trust him for our future. And within a year of that, we lived in our own home. I still look back and I can't believe it. We bought a house and we lived in it, and we paid something like £35 a month on the mortgage. It was ridiculously cheap. Within a year of that point, God provided this home for us. This is it right now. This is a picture of it today, right? 12 years ago. It's still got the playhouse that Johnny made for Gabby in it. It's still there. It's so heavy you can't move it. It's still there, and he built that swing. And this is it. It's just been put up for sale again, or for rent. So we took some pictures of it, and that we did that. We made that. Anyway, that's where we used to live. And God has always provided for us. Now, we don't own our own home now, but this is the home we live in now was miraculously provided for the charity, and God miraculously provides for our rent every single month to live in that place. And we are trusting, and sometimes it freaks me out that we don't own our own home. And I just think, what about the future? And what about, most people rely on their homes in their old age to sort of, support them with income. But I've got 20 years of trusting God in little ways. So when I have a moment and I panic and I worry about our future, I can look back and I can see all the times God has provided for us. And I can trust him that he's going to provide for us in our old age too. I can tell you so many stories. Now, we are a little bit unusual in terms of finances. Not everyone is called to live like we are. When we sometimes look at the 12 tribes and we liken ourselves to the Levites, who weren't given a bit of land in the promised land. Their inheritance was a spiritual inheritance, and they were sustained by the profits of the others. So I recognize that we're quite different to most people in that, and not everybody is called to live that way. We are part of the 12th, and we are sustained by the other 11, thank you, Lord. But God can sustain you, and he can provide financially for you. It might not look the same as ours, but he can do that. And yes, there have been, started small. Yeah, there are so many stories that I'm not going to go into it too much but there are so many stories of financial provision and material provision that God has given to us over the years that we could bore you for a lifetime. So we shall move on. Money is not actually the biggest thing at the end of the day. I mean, how many people who are rich and successful still are unhappy? How many people who look like they have everything, and yet among them suicide rates? Some of the richest countries in the world have the highest suicide rates. Money really isn't the be-all and end-all. It's really helpful in teaching us how to trust God because it's quite tangible, but it's not the most important thing. When I say work, that really talks about calling, about what we do with our time, what we do with our lives. When I was young, when I was 12, the next slide, I felt quite strongly, this passage in Ephesians, Christ gives himself the apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. Most of us can identify with one or two of those roles within the church, and I've always identified with being an evangelist. Since a very young age, I felt God say, your calling is to be an evangelist. But that's not very helpful when you're looking at UCAS applications. There's no university courses in evangelism. Like, how does that help you choose your career or your job? And the problem was I wasn't very good at evangelism. My passion would come across as anger, and I tend to wind people up. And then I got very afraid of what people think about me, and you can't be afraid of what people think about you if you're trying to, talk about Jesus. So I'm not actually very good at being an evangelist. Thanks, darling. But how that look? But God still manages to. I have an app called God for Kids that thousands of people play on every month, and that tells. I made the app, and then the app tells them about Jesus. So I've found a way, or God's found a way, to still fulfill my calling. But there's been moments. So when we first came from New Zealand here, there was a moment in our life when it was a period of waiting. And in that moment, we have a choice? Do you choose to seize your destiny and run after it and put everything into it? All you know, if you work hard enough, if you believe hard enough, if you put everything into it, you will make it. And yet there's times when God has told me just to wait. And this is where the rubber hits the road for me, because I just think, what if I miss my calling? What if I choose the wrong thing? What if I get to 90 and I've never done that thing I said I would do, or I've got it? What if I got it wrong? What if I've run after it and chased after it and I've got to the top of the ladder only to find out I'm on the wrong flipping ladder? Like, I find this is where finances now, I can believe God for finances, but this is something I still struggle with. What if I make wrong choices? What if I make a mistake? What if I've missed what I'm meant to be? But I do believe that who we are is more important than what we do. I do believe that the process, that the valleys, that the waiting is where God does his deepest work in us. I do believe that the mountaintops are not the end of the journey. They're not the goal. They're just one part of our journey in life. And I do believe that sometimes the things that we consider insignificant are things God considers really important. During this period of waiting, I listened to this sermon about Paul and how Paul, St. Paul in the New Testament Paul, his main job was an apostle. He traveled and he planted churches. And if you met him face to face, go, what was your main job? And he's like, well, I travel and I plant churches. That's what I do. He wrote letters while he was in prison just for something to do. His main role was the planting churches. And yet it's the letters 2,000 years later that we still read. It's not the churches that we don't go to the churches he established, but we still read his letters. The things that seemed insignificant to him are the things that God has used really, really powerfully. And that really helped me to just take the edge off a little bit and chill out a little bit and not worry too much about getting it wrong or making the wrong choice. Because all we really have is the next choice in front of us. All we really have is the very next thing in front of us. And there are times when I just think, I don't think anybody would look at my life and from a worldly point of view, I am not a success. We do not have we do have quite a nice big house, but it's not ours. We don't have a very high-paying job. I could have been a PR executive in a London firm. Johnny could have been a head teacher by now. My first book barely sold 600 copies. We're not a success in terms of statistics and what the world would see us. But I do believe we're exactly where we're meant to be. I do believe that we're doing what God has called us to do. And even though I struggle to question that from time to time, the only real choice I've got is the next one in front of me. And if I trust God with that, he'll take care of the rest. He'll take care of the future. So, are you ready for a fun story? Fun story. Here's a fun story. This one was a big rock, okay? We were in New Zealand and we were moving on. We knew God was telling us it was time to move on. Everything we were involved in was shutting down. All our ministries were just shutting down and God was saying it's time to move on. And then next slide, please. And then he gave Johnny this picture of a harbour, and there were all these boats coming and going everywhere, but the wharf that we were standing on was empty. And God said to Johnny, don't go looking up and down all the other wharfs looking at the ships and asking, is it this ship, is it this ship, is it this ship, is it this ship? He told us to stand on an empty wharf, and he would bring the ship to us. What that meant literally was about a year's worth of waiting and not looking for a job, and knowing that the job you're in is about to come to an end and not looking. And now that's madness. If you went to the job centre today and said, I haven't got a job, and they said, what are you doing to look? And you go, well, nothing. God's going to give me a job. They won't give you any money. They won't support you to do that. That's living by sight. God asked us to trust him by faith. And it was an excruciating wait. It absolutely was. It wasn't fun. And we made a few errors along the way. But God brought along a job for us in a miraculous way. A friend of ours called Bunty Bunts, she's amazing. She's also a friend of the people at the Oaks, and she was sitting in the garden at the Oaks, and she said to them, what do you need? And they said, we really need a program manager. And he has to be this, 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 and this. And they were describing Johnny. And she sat in their garden, she goes, I know who that is. And she sent Johnny an email, and the email said, Johnny, you need to contact Dan and Billy at the Oaks. And that was the whole email. We lived in New Zealand. We were like, who are Dan and Billy? What's the Oaks? And how do we get in touch with them? That's all she said. The next email had a bit more details. And it went from a Skype call very quickly. He visited Sheffield, got grilled to the nth degree by all these different people. And he got offered the position. And after a year of waiting, all of a sudden, it was like God had lined up dominoes. And when the first one got knocked down, all the rest got knocked down. We sold our house in a week. It was on the market for 8 days, and it went unconditional. In New Zealand, it goes conditional for a while and then unconditional. Ours went unconditional like that within 8 days, and it was sold, money in the bank. There was a house in Sheffield at the Oaks that became available, and the money for it became available all within the space of a few days of all this happening, bam, 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 bam. So we had a house we could move into. We had and we had a job to come to. A school became available for Gabby. Everything just felt like God had just lined everything up ready for us. And thank God we hadn't wasted a year of chasing dead ends and going down dark alleys. That is another story. Here we go. Finally, I'm not going to talk too much on relationships because I wrote a whole book about it. And if you really want all the details, you can read the book. But to summarize the main points, this was an area of weakness for me, relationships. As a young person, desperate for a boyfriend, desperate to get married from a very young age, turned up to university with 2 goals in mind: get a degree and get a husband. Walked into the Christian Union on the first night, scoured the room, found the best-looking guy there, made sure he had my phone number at the end of the night, went on a date with him, and he was so shocked, the poor guy. He brought along 6 friends with him as backup because he didn't even know what hit him. I was like a whirlwind of errors. God had to do a lot of work in my heart to actually prepare me for a relationship that would last a lifetime. And a big part of that was trusting him. It was trusting him. It wasn't jumping on the first good-looking person I came across. It wasn't. Well, I manipulated so many situations. I tell you, this one guy, he did not want to go out with me. He was determined to be a bachelor till the rapture, but I was determined to make him my boyfriend. And I did, and he really didn't like it. Honestly, I feel sorry for the guy now. And poor dude, he just couldn't say no. And in fact, when we broke up, I had to do it for him because I knew he wanted to break up with me. But he just couldn't get the words out. He was such a nice guy. And God asked me, though, to trust him. He said, trust me with it. Stop it. Stop trying to make it happen and trust me instead. Walk by faith, not by sight. And all my sight choices, what I thought were the perfect guy, actually, when I did meet God's choice for me, all of them, I was like, oh yeah, this guy's so much better. God's choice for me was so much better than I was choosing for myself. And isn't that just God's way? His choices for us are so much better than the ones that we make based on what we can see and feel and touch. He has really provided for us in so many ways, in so many of the most important ways. And we have got, I keep forgetting to my stones, we have got a lifetime's worth of stones that take you all the way through to the end of the maze. But just like Caleb and just like the Israelites, do you know we've got such terrible memories? We've got such terrible memories. As I was preparing for this, I was thinking, all right, God, what is it right now? What is it right now that I am not trusting you for? And I can tell you 3 things right now that I'm not trusting God for. I'm like, gosh, even with a lifetime's worth of stories of how God provides and cares and looks after us when we trust him, I still, just like the Israelites, can fail to trust him. And so this is a reminder for me as well at the moment. Right now, I run this little charity. We have a tiny budget. We have a tiny office. I've got so many ideas and so many dreams. And anybody looking at it from a material point of view would just think, well, you're dreaming. No chance. You've got no money. You've got no space. You've got no staff. And God's reminded me to dream big again. Because I've struggled with that. But not just based on whimsy. Not just based on, well, I'll just believe it and make it happen. But actually looking back through a lifetime of what has been God's word to me? What has he spoken over me? What does he say in his word? What are his promises for me? And it might not be to be big and rich and successful, but I do believe it's going to play a role that he's called me to play, to step up and play the unique role that God has called for me. And he does that for each one of us too. That every single one of you is here for a reason. And sometimes it's scary to step up and play the role God's given us to play. But if we don't, I don't think we thrive. I think that's when we don't thrive, is because we're not stepping up and doing what God has called us to do and said we can do. It is so easy to forget the faithfulness of God. but he is that best friend who walks beside us along the way. There's a bit in Song of Solomon where I always come back to Song of Solomon. I love Song of Solomon. There's a bit where he talks about the bride being like a horse, which doesn't sound very flattering. But if you look at that analogy, it is quite a powerful analogy because she carries the king and we carry the presence of King Jesus. We are honoured enough to carry the presence of King Jesus. And yet the relationship between a horse and his master is so close that a good, well-trained horse, all he needs to do is nudge him and the horse knows where to go. And when we thrive, I believe the goal is to be so close to God that all he has to do is whisper. All he has to do is nudge us, and we recognise his voice, and we recognise his touch, and we know it's this way, not that way. Not like Jonah. Think of Jonah. God had to send a storm and a shipwreck and a whale to get him on the right track. Let's not be the kind of people that God has to shout at to get us to where we're meant to be going. Let's be the kind of people who are so close to Jesus that we recognise when he's saying it's this way and not that way. The other thing I just wanted to end on, so we're going to finish now. Becky's out with, oh no, she's not there. So we are going to finish now. Now these are all quite precious rocks to us. We have collected them from different places. We don't do it so much anymore because you're not allowed to collect rocks anymore when you go places. But we do have collected them because they're things that we remember. They are significant things or places we've been to. And the Israelites did this too. They had rocks, they had stones of remembrance. Each one of the tribes gathered them and they planted them there. So I'd love you just to take a moment. So I was going to give you one of these rocks each, but I'm afraid I won't get them back. So you just use your imagination. I'm not giving them away. I want them back. Get some more rocks. What would be your rocks? Have a little minute and think. What are some of the things that God has done in your life that when you question or doubt or worry or afraid, you look back and you go, God did that then? And you say, God did that then. And you can hang a hold on to that and go, if he did it then, he'll do it again. What's your things? And if you would like, when you've thought of something, would you stand up? If that's all right. When you've thought of something that God has done in your life, that you trusted him for, even though it didn't seem to make sense or it wasn't a rational thing or other people were saying, that's crazy, but you trusted him and it was all right. See, I think that's really, really powerful, isn't it? You don't have, if you haven't got something, then look around, and these can be your pile of rocks. All these people in this room have got a story, have got a testimony of the faithfulness of God. And if you haven't got one yet, then what is going on at the minute where you need God, where you need to trust God about something? What's the next thing? What's the next decision or choice in front of you where you are not sure the right way to go? You're not quite sure what to do next. And could you give it a go, trusting God? Is it a relationship? Is it a work thing, a calling, a job? Is it financial? So I'm going to finish with a prayer. There's a few scriptures I didn't read out, so I'll tell them the text to chat later. Actually, I think I might read one. You go to that scripture. Romans 8. Can you put up the Romans 8 one? For those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his sufferings in order that we may also share in his glory. I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. For the creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. For the creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right up to the present time. Not only so, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for our adoption to sonship, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But hope that is seen is no hope at all, for who hopes for what they already have? But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. And he who searches our hearts knows the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for God's people in accordance with the will of God. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Okay, over to you, Ricky.
Thanks for that, Joanne. It's good to be reminded of how it's so easy in the midst of situations to not deliberately but forget how faithful God's been, and to see it sometimes and just think of those things where we know how faithful God is. So I'll just pray and then we'll have tea and coffee. Yeah. Father God, I just thank you that you are a faithful God, Lord, and that we can trust you, Lord. And I just pray that in those times when we can almost can't always see where things are going, that we can think back to your faithfulness and the times when we know you've been faithful. So, Lord, I thank you, you are faithful, Lord. And I just pray for each person here, Lord. I just pray that this week they would really know you, we would really know your faithfulness, Lord. I just pray that your blessing upon each person as they go into this next week, Lord. Amen. Right, yeah, so there's tea and coffee served as ever. If something has really spoken to this morning and you would like prayer, speak to me or Joanne or anyone with you. Don't go away having not dealt with something you need to. Thank you, and see you.